Welcome back to 535. This is Paul Kane of Notice. Joining me now is Gabe Fleisher. This is an appearance that is 11 years or so in the making. I first met Gabe at the Edward M. Kennedy Institute on a cold spring snowy day in Boston. Most people at that event didn't even know it was going to be outside.
Yeah, it's very cold.
And a lot of powerful people were upset that they weren't prepared for the winter. But in the Kennedy Institute, they have replicated the Senate floor and Senator Ted Kennedy's office in Russell. And I was looking around in that Russell office, and this kid, I'm sorry to call you a kid, but you were a kid.
It's true.
You were a kid then, comes up to me and is like, "Are you Paul Kane of the Washington Post?" And I look up, and there's this 7th or 8th grader there who's got a notebook, who's there to report, who's got the little press credential that we all had. And we had this great conversation, and I learned that Gabe, at his parents' house in suburban St. Louis, was publishing Wake Up to Politics, his own newsletter, written, largely for people of his generation. By 2020, he graduates high school, comes to Georgetown University, continues to build Wake Up to Politics. He's now 2 years out of Georgetown. Wake Up to Politics has 60,000 daily readers right now. It's in Substack. You should go find it, register if you want, even become a paying member to get better access to it. He does incredible stuff. Just the other day, Gabe had an incredible breakdown of polling averages, taking Nate Silver's polling averages and showing that at this point right now, Donald Trump is polling where Joe Biden was after that debate performance and where Trump was after the January 6th insurrection. So it's really great. Now, we brought you here for something that is a great feature that comes in Wake Up to Politics. What has Congress actually accomplished this week? To be young again and not be as cynical as I am about where things are always breaking down and Congress doesn't get anything done. Every week, Gabe, usually on Fridays, puts something out when Congress is in session to explain what happened that we didn't cover at Notice, the Star as of next month, or in other outlets. It's really, I look forward to it because I usually learn something or learn everything new. All right, this week, what did Congress accomplish?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Paul. I'm very excited. Congratulations on 535, and I'm excited to be here, and definitely think there's a lot of synergy with kind of what you were talking about, what I try to do at We Get to Politics, so it's good to be here. Yeah, so Congress, I always try to find the things that maybe even people here in this building don't know actually Congress did this week. So there's a few things. One kind of interesting piece of legislation that passed the Senate this week by unanimous consent was the Baby Changing on Board Act, and that's a bill that's been introduced in a few sessions. It's Marsha Blackburn and Peter Welch, bipartisan bill to basically require every Amtrak train to have a baby changing table on board. And, it's been, I think, since the Obama era that every federal building's been required to have a baby changing board, but now this will be also on trains for Amtrak passengers.
And now that's, talk about the oddball coalition.
Right.
Peter Welch from Vermont, just about as liberal as they come.
Exactly.
Marsha Blackburn, pretty far, probably among the 10 most conservative Republicans. And, I guess that's how they build a coalition that gets you to 98-0. Do we know anything more about the House and the White House support?
So it's a good question. Don't know about the White House support, but actually a different version has already passed the House last year. Lauren Underwood, I know, is the main Democrat on the bill in the House. It's interesting, there's minor differences between the two bills and about what types of trains would be covered and exactly what the requirements would be. So there's like minor House-Senate differences, but there's basically been two bills that have passed each chamber and then now obviously need to work out their differences.
And was there resistance to this? Was there,
it's unanimous in both chambers, so seemingly not.
But it's taken a couple of years.
Yes.
I mean, it's not going to be that expensive, is it?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, no, I think it's kind of minor expense. Many of them already have. It's not like they all don't have, so it's only kind of the kind of oldest kind of trains, kind of the last trains that are still kind of holding out, and there's been kind of complaints for years from Amtrak passengers who, expected, like there are on planes, like there are in many buildings, they could go on board and then change their babies, only to find out they can't, and so this is Congress trying to fix that issue.
All right, what else?
So another very interesting resolution in the Senate that got a little bit of coverage this week was from Senator John Kennedy to require basically during government shutdowns, obviously we've had a lot of government shutdowns this year, very long government shutdowns. And, there's always around the shutdowns, I think there's this idea, when there are many government workers going without pay, why are the people in this building, why are they getting paid? Not the staffers, but the members themselves continue to be paid. Some of them kind of forfeit their salaries during the shutdowns, but they're still technically receiving them. And so this was a resolution that would basically hold back their salaries during the shutdown. They'd still get the money when a shutdown ends, but this is only in the Senate to basically not pay senators during shutdowns.
This is really deep in the weeds, but I mean, this goes back to like English government and the Parliament and making sure that the king could not withhold Parliament's pay. And this was set up in the 1790s or early 1800s. And so therefore it was meant that like you couldn't have the executive branch just deciding, you know what, I'm not going to pay Congressman Fleisher next week. So it's just essentially Congress will always get paid, and yet you can have a 43-day shutdown in which no federal worker gets paid, but Congress is still collecting their pay.
And it's interesting, you mentioned kind of the long lineage of kind of conversations about pay. I mean, this was something they were literally thinking about at the Constitutional Convention. Like you talked about, like not only should the president be able to take members of Congress pay, but who's going to be deciding members of Congress salaries? Obviously it's Congress themselves. Feels like a bit of a conflict of interest. And so one of the first 12 amendments that was proposed to the Constitution, was supposed to be part of the Bill of Rights, was to prevent Congress from raising their own salaries in session. That didn't end up getting ratified till the 27th Amendment in the 90s, but was literally proposed by James Madison 200 years earlier. But now, because of the 27th Amendment, which has been ratified, this resolution would not take effect till the next Congress, because Congress can't change their own pay while they're in session.
And that's the thing. They're saying that even if to withhold their pay would be changing their pay.
So you can imagine some random member of Congress like, I want to get paid, and they sue under the 27th Amendment. Don't think we've ever had a 27th Amendment related lawsuit, but there's a very obscure lawsuit. You're right, actually, yes.
It's happening right now. The former Virginia Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, on behalf of a bipartisan group of former members and a couple of veteran members, is actually suing to say that the lack of a COLA, they haven't raised the salary here since 2009 for members, and at least in the even year, they're often withholding this mandated increase. They withhold it before they've had an election, which Cuccinelli has argued, and the judge in the case seems to be thinking like, oh my God, I don't want to be the guy that says Congress gets more money. It's very unpopular, but the law is pretty clear. So,
all right. That's a good point, yes.
What else did Congress accomplish?
Another very interesting bill so that was the Senate. Going back over to the House, there was the NICS Data Reporting Act, was passed this week. This is a bill by Thomas Massie, who's obviously been in the news a lot lately and is kind of fighting the political fight of his life right now, but still, interestingly, the Republican leadership putting up a bill of his for a vote, and this passed by voice vote in the House. And basically, this would require the Justice Department to report on racial disparities, and NICS is the federal gun background check system that the DOJ has, and require them to report on racial disparities and who's getting rejected when they're going through gun background checks to see if there's any kind of racism in the system going on in terms of who's getting rejected. And I just love this sort of bill, because I think, like you were talking about, the kind of unusual coalitions. You think about, this is a bill that kind of marries anti-racist, democratic principles and pro-Second Amendment Republican principles, which kind of gets everyone together for Republicans to kind of be doing like a DEI-esque bill and Democrats to doing a pro-gun rights bill, and everyone's voting on it together. So it hits everyone just in the right place that they all voted for it.
And for the alphabet soup version, NICS is the National...
I think it's Instant Criminal System, I think?
Yes. Okay. It's meant to be the instant background check system to make sure that criminals aren't buying guns. A few years ago, after one of the mass shootings, there was a congressional modest bill called Fix NICS that was trying to make sure that the background checks were worked out well. This is my chance to plug a great noticed story by my colleague Reese Gorman, who was at an institution of institutions in Washington, the Tune In, the other night and witnessed Rand Paul's son accosting Mike Lawler, Republican congressman from New York, with some very anti-Semitic actions and behavior about the Thomas Massey primary. And that primary that is the next week in northern Kentucky has turned into a lot of racial ethnic underbrush, really blowing up on both sides of the Trump-supported opponent to Massey, and it really has lit the fires. And yet here he is on this bill, working with the coalition that on something that the Congressional Black Caucus would probably support.
Fascinating. Yes.
Yeah.
So,
all right. What else? What else?
So we got two resolutions, both in the House and Senate, very similar resolutions. Obviously, the president right now is in China, been meeting with Xi Jinping. It's a very important summit. And it's been interesting. I mean, you've written a lot about this in the last few years, kind of Congress really ceding their influence in the foreign affairs space to the executive branch. Obviously, we see this with the Iran war, but we see it in a lot of places. Used to be not uncommon for Congress to pass bills or resolutions, trying to sway foreign policies, become more and more unusual. So I thought this was interesting. Both chambers passed resolutions basically encouraging the president to bring up, while he's meeting with Xi Jinping, this issue of different kind of political prisoners, basically imprisoned in China. A few Christian pastors who've been imprisoned. Jimmy Lai, who's the Hong Kong pro-democracy media publisher, democracy activist, media mogul in Hong Kong. He's been imprisoned. And I thought that was an interesting example of, it's a non-binding resolution, so it might not be much, but it's still an interesting example of bipartisan, unanimous, both chambers, kind of calling on the president to do something in the foreign affairs realm, which they've kind of been doing less and less in recent years.
And look, these non-binding resolutions are often taken very seriously back in the nations of, there was a dispute trying to get just a non-binding resolution to declare the Turk slaughter of Armenians, to call it a genocide. This was not going to be a State Department finding. It was just going to be a congressional resolution, basically printed paper. And the lobbying fight went on for more than 20 years over whether or not they would do that, because those countries were very vested in having Congress say, this was a genocide, or this was not. Adam Schiff, who had the largest number of Armenians in his district, became the lead sponsor of it, and he got that resolution passed in the middle of Trump impeachment 1.0. It was a very crazy, weird moment of full life circle for him. All right. What else do we got?
Yeah, so last thing is not a bill that's been passed yet, and I should say all those were passed except for the shutdown resolution. That's was a 99-0 cloture vote. It's probably not much need for cloture, but that one's still advancing. The other ones have passed. This is a bill we're going to be seeing a vote on soon through a process that both you and I have written about a fair amount. It's kind of the discharge petition process that's had quite the renaissance in this Congress. We went years with no discharge petitions, which are basically if 218 members of the House sign on to a discharge petition, they can force a vote on a bill, even if the Speaker does not want a vote on that bill. And there was basically none for most of the 21st century. There's been 6 this Congress. The 6th reached 218 signatures this week, which is the most ever, tied for the most ever. This goes back to the 1930s when the modern discharge petition was created.
And there were 2, I think, in 2024?
Yes, I think 2 in the last Congress.
So we're up to 8
yes,
in a little
which is unheard of in kind of the modern era.
Really unique thing. I'm going to test you out here. So its 218th signature yesterday was Kevin Kiley, formerly a Republican from outside Sacramento, who's now an independent and running for re-election in a tough district as an independent. It's got 218 signatures, but there are actually only 215 people supporting it.
Yes.
Explain that.
When you sign on to a discharge petition, even if you have died or resigned or left the House, it stays in stone. It's if you've signed the petition, you've given it one more signature, and that stays. So even though, as we know, there's been many deaths and resignations and churn this Congress, but even the people who have left and are no longer members and might not even be alive anymore, they are still on that petition.
That bill will be going forward on the backs of Eric Swalwell, Phyllis McCormick, both of whom resigned in disgrace, and David Scott, who passed away last month or earlier this month. Now, usually what happens once you hit that 218, there are a lot of people in the majority who are probably secretly wanting to support this. So do we think that there will be larger number of Republicans that come out and support this?
Yeah, and so this bill, just to say it, it's for Ukraine aid. It's about $1.3 billion in Ukraine aid for this bill. And yes, I think you're exactly right. You can look at, it always hits exactly 218, and the distribution expires, so no one else can sign after that. But you look at the votes for past, when this has happened in the past, and it often gets up to 235, 245, 250, and certainly looking at, obviously, Ukraine votes over time have gotten more and more partisan and lopsided, but we've still seen generally more Republicans than just the handful who signed on the petition support it when it's actually come to the floor in the past. So I would expect higher vote than that when it comes
and
to
it was believed at one point that was like a tough issue for Republicans in primaries. After they passed the big national security supplemental 2 years ago, which included a huge chunk of money, maybe $100 billion for Ukraine, not a single Republican suffered any political consequence in their primary.
Except Kevin McCarthy, you could argue, suffered consequences.
Yes.
But
well, that is true.